Hello and welcome to the Bath Studio School. I'm Gabriel and I'm interviewing Dr Sharon Gillings of the Labour Party, who is running for Kingsmead ward as part of our local election interviews. Welcome, Dr Gillings.
Thank you.
But you wish to be called Sharon. That's what I shall refer to you as.
Yeah.
Now, you're an NHS GP, is that correct?
I am.
So what made you decide to run for local council?
Yeah. Well, I think I've always been political, even through my medical career and even, back in school campaigning days. So I've always sort of had this background of trying to make things better through my work and in my personal life. So it just felt like a completely natural extension. I've worked representing GPs, I've worked representing the practice, and so representing the people of Kingsmead just felt a completely natural thing for me to do. I've worked there for over 16 years and I really enjoy the diversity of Kingsmead, and I think I could be a good voice for Kingsmead. So when the by-election happened, I just naturally felt like it was the right thing. Yeah.
That sounds great. You also run a homeless health service on Manvers Street.
I do, yeah.
So should you be elected, you will be councillor, a GP, and also running a homeless health service. That's a lot of huge responsibilities, and it's really impressive. But do you not think you might be a little overstretched?
Yeah, and that is a really good question. And when I first put myself up to run in the by-election, the members who selected me actually asked me that question, and it was something I had thought about, obviously. I think if you look back over my life, I genuinely enjoy being busy, and we all have our different levels where we get our energy, and actually the busier I am, the more energy it gives me, especially if I really feel strongly about it. So actually, the more I do, the more energy it gives me. And I'm really lucky in my work. I'm not at work every day. I have Fridays off and I have afternoons off, so I have a balance. And running the homeless health service is fantastic, and I do it on behalf of our partnership, and so I have time away from working patient-facing in that role. So it's really important to achieve a balance, but I think it's really important as well to know where you get your balance.
That's really interesting. Also, I wanted to ask, what made you choose to run as a Labour Party candidate as opposed to, say, a Liberal Democrat candidate?
I mean, that's just such an easy choice. I've been a Labour supporter for years and a Labour member for the last few years and increasingly active. And for me, it comes down to values. Basically, I completely identify with Labour values. And that's what you get when you get a Labour councillor. The independents, we don't know what their values are. The Lib Dems, I think they can switch their values around depending on what suits them. For me, it's about values. You know what you're getting when you get a Labour councillor, and for me, it's not really a question.
You mentioned how you thought the Liberal Democrats shifted their views a little bit to fit, maybe, do you mean to fit the political climate?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what you see now is Liberal Democrats complaining about austerity and complaining about cuts. And it's just really hard to swallow because they had a choice and they went down and supported the austerity agenda. And it's very easy now to flip that over and be complaining about it. But obviously that I find that deeply concerning that people aren't challenging that.
Do you think the Liberal Democrats might have been different if they went into coalition with Labour in 2010?
Well, who knows? Who knows? Because it's hard to know what they would have done, because there is that sort of... I think it's really easy to be very popularist and centrist and say, oh, we can make it all fine and we can just choose this middle ground and it's all fine. But who is it fine for? What are the values that underpin that? So that's where I just really align with the Labour values.
Now, in regards to the council, you have spoken out about this current council's policy suggestions regarding the clean air zone. And there are different ways of tackling street pollution. Is this going to be a top priority if you get elected?
Yeah, well, it's really interesting that the council have done a massive U-turn on this. Air pollution needs addressing. Bath is congested, and we all know that something has to be done. And I think it really says quite a lot about the current council. So when the proposals came out in November, I read the detail of it, went into the options appraisal. It was really clear to me that they were making a mistake. So what they were doing is really narrow focus thinking. The government say they have to do this by the shortest amount of time possible, and they just throw everything at that without looking up. And in our leaders, we need vision. We need them to look up, we need them to see the bigger picture, and we need them to do the right things.
Yeah.
And that is what has not happened. And for me, it was obvious from November, once they published that they had it wrong. And it's great that, to be fair, they've done a U-turn, but we didn't even need to be in this position.
Yeah.
And if I can just say that going back, we've known about this problem for years under the Lib Dem Council, under the Tory-led council, and they haven't addressed the underlying issues of public transport and getting people around the city. So it's a massive issue, and I just feel that it's lack of leadership and lack of doing the right thing that's got us to where we are.
So am I correct in thinking your main complaint about their clean air zone ideas is the fact that they've got less policies suggesting new ways to support the public transport system?
No, I mean, it's around the fairness of the proposal that they put out as well. So when they went for the CAS-D, that would have meant that the poorest people with the oldest cars doing shift work would end up being penalised. If you drove a really nice brand new car, you wouldn't end up paying. So it just was really disadvantaging a really small section of the population. And I felt, looking at the evidence, that we could really get close to meeting our targets and then eventually meet them with a much fairer policy. So I really felt that they had just not been able to look up and see what was the right thing.
But aren't old cars dirtier? If that formed some of the logic behind what they're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if people bought diesel cars in good faith, that's the first thing to say, because everyone thought that they were better. We know that's not true now.
Yeah.
And there's an environmental impact on actually scrapping cars. So you have, we can't just all scrap the old cars. So there has to be a balance, and it has to be just.
And actually, an interesting fact. I actually know people who have close relationships with the advent of diesel cars. It was known that diesel cars were more polluting than petrol the whole time.
Right.
They only looked at certain chemicals coming out of the exhaust in petrol cars. So although petrol cars release, I believe, more CO2 than diesel cars release far more nitrous oxide, which is a lot worse.
Yeah.
So it's all a bit screwy.
Absolutely. And there's a really interesting thing around nitrous oxide and what it does to your lungs. It actually aggravates and irritates them and causes the airways to become reactive.
Yeah.
So we know there's that.
With respiratory disorders.
We absolutely know there's that direct link. Yeah.
Absolutely ridiculous. Do you think it might be a good idea to put more plants around the centre of Bath, like to suck out all the toxins? If we can't get a clean air zone, then surely planting more trees or maybe even just hanging baskets might be a good idea.
I think the evidence is that the nitrous oxide levels are really quite close to the pavement, so they really are right by those main thoroughfares, and the nitrous oxide levels dissipate very, very quickly. It's always going to be a good idea to have a greener city, but I'd have to look at. I'm not quite sure what the evidence to support that to achieve the target is. I don't think that's there.
That's fair enough. I mean, I'm not saying I'm a botanist or anything.
But I like the idea. And there's, Bath is beautiful, but it could, everything could be improved. It's kind of got a little bit smoky and congested.
Yeah.
Is it the city we want to live in?
Yeah. So you also seem passionately concerned with the increase of empty shops in Bath. What do you think you can do as a councillor to address these issues?
Yeah, well, there's obviously the things that central government are doing, which is setting business rates that we can't control, and we have to lobby government as a council to try to help us support our local shops.
Yeah.
But the council does own a lot of property, and it all comes back to that austerity agenda. So people don't have money, the pay is stagnated, they can't spend money in shops, it's expensive to get into the shops. So there's a whole range of things that need to be done to support local shops. The council is chasing the pounds because it's being cut, so they can't afford to reduce rents on the commercial properties that they own. People can't get cheaply into Bath, so people stay out of Bath and then they shop online. So there's a whole range of measures as a council, being mindful of the fact that business rates are central. But again, I think there are a range of support that council could give for local businesses.
Okay. Have you got any ideas in particular?
Well, I mean, our manifesto is due to be published, and I can't wait to get that out there because a lot of work has been done. But there are things like supporting enterprises, so helping people be educated and developing small businesses, being a resource. So there's also a way of the council looking at providing HR and IT support and financial advice support for small businesses to really give them really practical help.
Yeah.
So I think there's a range of things, and like the manifesto will be out soon, and that's got a whole bit dedicated to supporting small business.
Okay. Well, this current council have also recently expressed an idea along those sorts of lines that over the next 2 financial years, retailers valued at £51,000 or less could be offered business rate discounts, cutting them up to a third.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on this idea?
That seems like a really good idea. Absolutely anything that we can do to support them because they are struggling.
So would this be one thing that you agree with the council on?
Can we find one thing? Of course, you can't. And I think it's really important. I'm a very practical person and I like working collaboratively, so I'm not in the habit of disagreeing with things that are clearly right for the sake of it.
So you would say that you're not bipartisan at all?
Well, clearly I've got my values and I stick with them really strongly, but a good idea is still a good idea.
Yeah, so sometimes the other side can get it right.
Of course, and it would be strange to say that they couldn't.
Okay. Now, time for the really hard, nasty questions.
Okay.
On the Labour Party website, you blamed the 2010 to 15 coalition government for the rise in rough sleeping and homeless people. Yeah. You also go on to talk about and correct me if I'm wrong, but you somehow appear to be blaming the Liberal Democrats for causing the Brexit vote to have come about.
I'm not blaming the Liberal Democrats for that. I blame the coalition for that.
Yeah.
So that's the Liberal Democrats and the Tories.
Okay.
People voted in Brexit for a change. They're struggling. I don't have to articulate again the effects of austerity. And people were told, do you want to have everything as it is now? Or do you want to have something different that we can't tell you what it is, but something different from now? So I think that underpins the Brexit vote hugely. So I do blame the coalition for setting the conditions that led to the Brexit result. And my problem with the Liberal Democrats is that they were not owning that responsibility and they are pushing so hard for a people's vote and they are not accepting the result of the referendum. And I find that hypocritical. Yeah. And that, I think, it is an issue for me. Okay. And the other thing I suppose it's really interesting is that Brexit is a massive issue. On the doorsteps, when we knock on the door, people are absolutely overwhelmingly concerned by it. But obviously on the doorstep, the conversation is quite difficult because we do have to say, though, I am running in a local election. Yeah.
Well, if I may quote you, just...
Oh, yeah, go on.
As the 5th largest world economy, these cuts were a political choice and a deliberate act of social engineering. Yeah. Where a Hobhouse's concern, of course, our Bath MP, about homelessness feels dishonest. The evidence for a party's role in plunging millions into poverty is overwhelming. And Professor Alston, who ran the UN report, concluded that, ironically, it was these very fears and insecurity of poverty that contributed significantly to the Brexit vote. I hope this irony is not lost on the Lib Dems. Do you still stand by everything you said there?
Absolutely, 100%. I thought about it quite carefully when I wrote it. I read the UN report. I went to the Vera Hobhouse's conference on homelessness. I do stand by that.
So you assured yourself very strongly and did plenty of research.
I did.
If only more people could do that before jumping to conclusions. Yeah. So I'd like to say well done for doing all your research. Okay. Because not many people do that.
Thank you.
So what do you think needs to be done in particular to sort out the current homeless crisis in Bath?
Well, I think there's a range of measures, and I think there are 2 types of homelessness, and we've got the very visible street homelessness, which is a real erosion of all the public sectors that support vulnerable people. But then we've got this huge problem, which is less visible, which is the people not being able to afford their own home, people living on sofas, and people trapped in that whole insecure circle. A home is so fundamental. can you imagine just trying to have a job, hold down a job, raise a family, cook your food? All of these things are just absolutely based on us having somewhere to live. So with this street homelessness, there's obviously that complexity, and it's very much now reliant on the charity sector to help fulfil the needs.
Yeah.
And they do an incredible job. But obviously they are constantly chasing short-term contracts, trying to keep staff. And so we really need the state to own some responsibility for that. And it's complicated, and it means investment in mental health services and in social care and health and education from the beginning. So that's a really complicated thing, which could be solved. That's a choice.
Yeah.
We could do that. And there's something around affordable housing and around building housing that just means that people might actually have an opportunity to have a home. And again, it's a choice.
Yeah. And so what would you do with regards to the lack of affordable housing?
Yeah,
then? Bath is the 6th most expensive place to live in the UK outside London.
Yeah.
So are there things we can do?
Yeah, well, when there are new developments, we do absolutely, as a council, need to hold the developers to really fulfil their obligation for the proportion of affordable housing to be provided. And it is not good enough for us to accept developers saying it's not economically viable for us to build it with affordable housing in. So we have to be strong in the face of people who are clearly motivated in other directions to hold true to our values.
Yeah.
And there are some sort of technical details as well, and I don't want to go down into too far technical details, but there's something around a local housing allowance.
Yeah.
Which a Labour council could lobby for us to be distanced from North East Somerset, where rents are lower, because at the moment it's an average for the whole of Bath and North East Somerset, which means that it's harder for people to get that local housing allowance is set at a lower rate than is actually applicable for most properties in Bath. So there are some real technical details. But then there's also just if you are making decisions based on your values, and housing is a huge part of the Labour manifesto, then you'll kind of do the right thing.
Okay. Well, that all sounds very good and positive. Brexit.
Yes, back to Brexit.
What's your stance on Brexit?
Oh my goodness, do I have to answer this? It's so complicated, and I've got my personal views, and we've got the Labour Party views, and actually they are. How do you think Brexit will affect Bath? Or is it still too early to tell with all the running about that Theresa May is doing? Yeah, I think it's still too early to tell. Because it's not just going to affect Bath, is it? It's going to affect all of us. Mm-hmm. And I don't think we've even begun to understand the difficulties that it will cause. So we're completely tied up on this one moment of decision. But actually, whether we go with a deal, whether we go with a no deal, the implications will last with us for years about economic prosperity and about security. And every single contract that we've got has to be renegotiated. From a health service point of view, genuinely, the supply of medications is a huge concern. Recruiting staff is a huge concern. And I think we're just sort of we're working towards it, aren't we? And actually, I've really respected the Labour position on this, because essentially it was the Tories, a reckless gamble to keep their party together. They have made a complete hash of negotiating it. It isn't the Labour Party's job to get them out of this. They're not in power. They're in opposition. We've had to sit back and let them, unfold and make their mistakes. And we would be ready to be in power and make a better job of it. So it's distressing. It's distressing for everybody. And I know in my head I know where the blame for that lies.
Yeah. And now, you may have heard of Greta Thunberg, who is the 16-year-old Swedish girl, and she's inspired students around the world to protest from school every Friday about climate change and their governments. Do you think this is an effective way for students to protest?
Yeah, absolutely, because I think a mass movement like that, it's in the media, isn't it? People are seeing it, talking about it, realising it's an issue. And it, coming from the young people, it's their future. So I thought that was really inspiring. Yeah.
Cool. So your party doesn't support lowering the voting age to 16 years old. Any chance you may reconsider this?
Me personally,
Yeah.
it's really interesting, isn't it? And I've got my daughters are aged 17 and 18, and it will be my daughter's first time to vote in May in the local elections.
That must be so exciting.
Yeah, I think it is exciting. So if you ask me on my personal view, I would say that the 16-year-olds are often very engaged and very insightful and have thought about it, especially the ones who would go and vote. So I think there's a debate to be had, and personally I'd be happy for the voting age to be lowered.
Okay. So we've done a lot of questions. So why don't we wrap up with, what would you like to achieve as a councillor for your ward?
I think what I'd like to be is very responsive to their needs. I think essentially as a councillor you're representing your constituents in a very practical local level. So I think that's the thing I would want to be. I'd want to be very responsive, and I would just want to show them that I can work hard to make their views heard on council.
Well, thank you very much for your time, Sharon, Dr Gillings. And thank you for watching. This has been Local Election Interviews at the Bath Studio School. I'm Gabriel. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you, Gabriel.
You're very welcome.